Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Adrian Amos from Synergy Technical. I'm joined by John Opgenorth, our local Richmond area AE account executive. And we are excited to be talking about getting back to basics today. This isn't really my show. This is actually John's show because once again I found myself on the interviewee seat, but I stole the intro. So John?
I'll try and flip-flop the roles at some point and put the pressure back on you.
I appreciate
you having me in here. It's so nice to be behind the camera and the bright lights, and excited to be talking with you about getting back to basics. So as Adrian said, my name's John Opgenorth. I'm an account executive with Synergy Technical, local to the Richmond area. Been local for about a year and a half now.
Wow, really?
Moved down from, time just keeps on marching
man.
on. But moved down from Wisconsin, about a year and a half ago, and really enjoying this warm summer weather that y'all have down here. But
I'm glad you're enjoying it. We turned the temperature down special just for you recently here, so clearing out some of the summer high humidity for you.
Yeah, well, it's been a change, but happy to be here and happy to be in the office and be local and seeing people face to face. It's good to be down here. So
awesome.
Appreciate the warm intro. And speaking of intros, a little bit about Synergy Technical. If you're unfamiliar, this is your first time tuning into the broadcast. We are an IT consulting firm headquartered here in Richmond, Virginia. We're just on Broad Street right now in the Fan. We were founded in 2011, so in cloud years, maybe 200 years ago. Started with the vision of the big bet on the cloud, and started working with cloud migrations, consulting around strategies, licensing, security, productivity, anything you name under the sun Microsoft. Well, that's a pretty broad umbrella, but security and productivity is kind of what we specialize in. We've helped deploy over 3 million seats in O365. I think Matt is actively migrating some right now as we speak in the other room, and do a ton of work that's garnered awards over the last decade plus, most notably Microsoft 365 Security Deployment Partner of the Year in 2020, which was a big year for securing hybrid workloads.
It sure was, although we did win that award before the world went and hid under a rock for a year. That was pretty exciting to get to travel out to San Francisco, and not to tear this too far down the path, but the boat that had the first people diagnosed with COVID was actually in the harbor while we were there in San Francisco. So the timeliness of it was a little wild.
I was a little suspect.
A little bit suspect.
So today's theme really is getting back to basics, and we're going to throw another acronym out there. It's not a three-letter word. It's a four-letter acronym.
It's
CTEM.
A four-letter word, yeah. So John and I have been, since he's been in town for the last 18 months, I really thought it was longer than that.
Yeah.
We've been going to a lot of local conferences, local events. We've been attending a lot of breakfasts, and we recently just became a sponsor, I think, of the newly revamped Microsoft 365 users group that's here in Richmond.
Yeah.
And as we've been going to these events, we've been hearing from people who've been on stage and hearing from people who've been in attendance about what the security concerns are that they have, right? And it's all well and good for us as salesperson and engineer to think, these are the problems that I believe organizations are facing these days. But it's been really fascinating hearing from the people who are actually in the trenches, and whether they've been keynote speakers or even FBI presenters, or all sorts of things. We've kind of heard some similar themes around vulnerability management, right? Mm-hmm. And this really sort of started for me, and again, this is his show and I'm stealing it from him, I apologize. This really started for me a couple years ago at the inaugural RVA Tech CyberCon, where the keynote speaker was a CISO who he spoke for a while about this idea of he can't spend every waking moment worrying about every tiny vulnerability that comes out, right? And some of these vulnerabilities may be tiny in perspective, but they may seem very big, right? So there's lots of different ways that organizations have been able to assess vulnerabilities, right? So there's and we heard all of these great details at the big conference you and I attended this summer at RVA Sec, right? We attended a speech specifically around a data scientist was talking about different ways to rank and prioritizing vulnerabilities. Exactly.
Right.
But we've been to so many events now over the last, I guess, 18 months, right? Where that's just been such a focus. And there are a lot of tools that have kind of come out in the last couple of years to really help you assess and rank and prioritize vulnerabilities. But I feel like the concern that I've heard more and more over the years has been, well, I don't have time to worry about that. It's a 0 day. I just need a product that fixes it. And what I feel like I've seen a lot of, and you as the salesperson, you can certainly attest to whether this is true, is that people want to buy a solution that just fixes the problem.
Yes, I would say it's you're missing the forest for the trees almost in trying to find niche solutions that cover everything under the sun while not necessarily focusing on things that are have material impact to your specific organizational requirements. What frameworks and regulations that you have to be beholden to, right? Necessary. Like if I am a commercial business that retails clothes, maybe I don't really need to be super focused on what HIPAA requirements are in data.
Fair enough, right? Gather. You may have a PCI DSS challenge for credit card processing, but so there's compliance elements of it. There's regulatory elements of it. There's data security elements of it. But what I feel like what I keep hearing is, well, tell me. So and part of what I do, right? And John brings me to bear all the time on these is I do security. What do we call them?
Immersion experiences.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, where we actually go through a fully licensed M360, Microsoft 365 E5 tenant. It's got all the security and all the compliance bells and whistles, and we kind of show like how all the parts are designed to fit together. We talk about it from the attack kill chain and it's a very simplified version of the attack kill chain from initial ingress through command and control through lateral movement to data exfiltration or domain dominance. And when we go through those conversations, a lot of the times the conversation has been, well, do I want Microsoft or do I want this third-party competitor or do I want this third-party competitor to just be my all-up security solution, right? People, again, they want to buy one big product and have it be done.
That ever-elusive single pane of glass.
Exactly. But, as we know, because we've been doing this for a very long time, just buying the top-tier product, does that close the gaps for you? Just having the product, right?
There's a lot of questions that fall beneath that. Do you have the resources to man and have two eyeballs on each of those dashboards, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do they have the skills to configure and deploy these security solutions? Is it really just a checkbox?
So there's manpower, there's skills gaps, there's monitoring. I mean, how many clients have we talked to that have a mailbox that's simply set up to monitor for alerts, right? And then after 6 months, is anybody even monitoring the mailbox anymore because it's just an explosive minefield of alerts? So again, as we've been going and we've been attending these events, we've been hearing more and more about this concept of ranking and prioritizing vulnerabilities. And the guy who was doing the speech at the original CyberCon, he was really talking about he needs to be able to rely on basic security products to simply do their jobs, right? So that they exist as mitigations in place for new vulnerabilities as they come out. And I thought that was really interesting because I had also just watched the keynote from the previous fall's Microsoft Blue Hat conference where the keynote speaker was talking about exactly that. He was talking about you have all these 0-day vulnerabilities, but when you put them in context of the actual things that they expose, they may put you at a 0.000004% chance of being attacked because of other mitigations that you have in place. So taking all that into context and applying it back to the conversations that we've heard around town, again, at the breakfasts and all the other fun stuff that we've been to, it really seems like, or it seemed to me coming into this year, like there was a really strong push from our side of the table, from the sales and pre-sales side, to get organizations to understand you may actually already have the tools that you need. And in fact, we cover that a lot of the time, uncover that a lot in licensing assessments,
Absolutely.
right? Discovering that customers actually already own things they're just not leveraging. You may already own tools, but do you use those tools in determining whether or not you are at risk for some new emerging threat vector? Right?
Yeah.
And so, like, hearing all of those conversations and putting all of that together, I started doing some research, and I discovered that Gartner had just produced an article that named all of this.
Yeah.
And that's where we're going to get into our fun new acronym. And we know we all love acronyms because we just spent the last 7 years learning about zero trust and, learning all of our EDRs and our MDRs and our XDRs and all that kind of fun stuff. But now we're layering in what's called continuous threat exposure management. That's it. CTEM.
Yes.
And we're not going to argue about how to pronounce that. We're just going to call it CTEM. It's not going to be the SIM-SEAM argument or any of that kind of stuff. But at a very high level, CTEM builds on existing capabilities that are already in things like SecureScore, right? To allow you to understand what your real actual exposure is and manage those risks that are brought in by your exposure through tools that you may already have, a cataloging process, a weighting and prioritizing process, to really help make sure that you're not doing more than you have to do, so that you can get on with delivering your business goals. Right?
And while it's a new acronym, I think it's kind of like AI, the whole AI motion of just we'll slap a .ai on our product and look, it's something new, when in reality it's technology that we've been using for a while. I would argue that CTEM has been a general framework that we've been doing, as you mentioned, through those immersion experiences, through the security assessments that we regularly conduct. It's trying to get a handle on what is the overall scope, right, of my threat landscape. Going through discovery and prioritizing kind of what's more most important, what is the low-hanging fruit for me to tackle right away versus what is going to take a lot of resources and complex engineering knowledge to get in place, and we'll put that into our roadmap, right? It's taking those findings from that assessment, and then when you get to the actual confirmation that, okay, these are the threats that I'm looking at, how do I validate and mobilize people against it? Do we have an incident response plan documented in place? And well, I've heard that, our incident response plan is we just get our support desk, which we encourage, having a formal action plan and knowing what resources are doing what activities based on certain events being triggered. Having that plan in place is something that we've done before, and all the way through actual simulations like tabletop exercises and some of the cool stuff that we saw at RVA Sec with the actual blue team, red team kind of simulation experiences.
Yeah, they're some really amazing speakers. Their whole catalog of talks are available on YouTube. I highly encourage. Sit down and watch some of them. I believe some of the CyberCon events are actually also out there too. Again, if you have the opportunity, great stuff. There's so much that's happening in Richmond, and we've heard some of it again at our local user groups that again we've been sponsoring. But so it sounds like, and I believe this fundamentally, that CTEM isn't really anything new. Just like zero trust wasn't really anything new. It was really just a operationalized paradigm, right? So we're just saying that, like, look, we're codifying the way that we're approaching vulnerabilities, right? So maybe we use CVSS version 3.0 that changes the way that things are, weighted and prioritized, but we're also comparing the real risk of the exposure against the mitigations that we have in place. And the kind of the example that I give of that actually was a scenario that I got called on 5 years ago, long before CTEM was an idea, right? So again, this is nothing new. So I actually was at a conference, and a client called me and said, hey, there's a 0 day. We have some prepaid hours. Can we use those prepaid hours to go and chase this and close this vulnerability? And so instead of doing that, we looked up the threat analysis report that was published by Microsoft into the threat analytics dashboard in the Microsoft Defender space, and it had a full breakdown of what the entire attack kill chain was. And it explains that in order to get to this step you had to have this, in order to get to that step you had to go whatever, but to get to the final payload, the delivery of the payload, you needed to be running a version of Windows 10 prior to 1809. So 1809 and newer were not vulnerable, right? And so we're reading down through the analyst report, and I'm on the phone with the guy, and I'm like, okay, so it says here that the full ultimate detonation cannot occur if you have 1809, right? What version of Windows are you running? He said, oh, we just completed a global deployment of 1809. And I'm like, okay, right? So that was actually CTEM in action, right? We had and we'll get into what all the little bits and steps are, but we looked at existing mitigations and decided that the critical element of it was the payload that they wanted to avoid, which was a ransomware payload. We wanted to avoid that being detonated in the environment, so we had sufficient mitigations in place that they didn't need to lose the prepaid hours that they had bought for a different project.
Right.
And we're able to just continue on with delivering the services that organization, depended on.
Right.
So we've been doing it for years, right? I mean, like actually literally doing it for real for years. So let's kind of talk about what CTEM really is, okay? So Gartner defines it as a 5-step process. And those steps are what? There's scoping, discovery, prioritization, validation, and mobilization. So with scoping, what we're doing is we're saying we're going to identify all the risks that we know about, everything that we know that could take us down as an organization, right? Whether it's the versions of our servers or what flavor of IIS our website's running on, or what else you got? I'm putting him on the spot.
I couldn't even think.
Come on, names of vulnerabilities.
Your endpoints. Are you patching your endpoints?
Patching, yes,
are you
absolutely.
managing
How are you managing patching, right?
Software versions.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not also limited to technology. It's people.
Yeah.
Our users trained and aware of the latest, social engineering attacks that are out there, right? It's informing the people. It's also taking in effect our processes, right?
Yeah.
Do I have sensitivity labels applied on my documents that I'm sharing with external parties? So recognizing
our exposure is going to be, again, it's going to be our physical assets, it's going to be the data that we need to secure, it's going to be things like even up to and including social media creds, right? Because what we want to do is we want to avoid reputational and financial harm. And what was the one that we were talking about the other day was the scenario where real, actual financial harm occurred to, it was Eli Lilly.
Oh, sure.
During that brief period right after the ownership change at Twitter, right, when anybody could register, anybody could register a blue check mark. Somebody bought a look-alike name for Eli Lilly and said insulin is free, and they wiped off $1 billion, I think it was, overnight.
Right. Yeah.
And
is that necessarily something that you can control as an
there you go,
IT administrator?
Right. So I mean, some things are outside of your grasp, and part of understanding what your real risk portfolio looks like is going through the process of understanding and scoping what do we do, for whom do we do it, and how can we be impacted, right? So that's the scoping part. But it also is a continuous process, right? So a lot of times the challenge we've gotten into in the past has been organizations want to do a security assessment, which we always encourage, but they tend to view it as a single event, a point in time, right? So you get your list of all the things you got to fix, you fix them, and then you're like, cool, but things keep happening, and so security tends to drop back down. And then
Right.
3 years later, you do another security assessment, and you kind of ride from peaks to troughs. So the idea here with this as a continuous process is that you need to be not just open to the idea of learning what risks you have, but to accepting more risks as you go.
Right.
Because you will accept more risks as you go, whether you want to or not,
Yeah.
right? So the scoping part recognizes that there is a lot of risk out there, and we need to have a way to identify it. Then we need to move into the discovery phase of looking at, what additional risks are imposed by our exposure, right? So it's not going to be just the actual name of the vulnerability. It's also going to be, if they get a foothold in that system, what other systems can be exposed by access to these things. So we're going to understand the blast radius, and we're going to be able to, again, start understanding what mitigations and controls we have in place. Then we're going to move from that, and I'm looking at your screen because I can barely see it. Yeah, my eyes don't work super great. Prioritization, right?
Through all what you just laid out, that seems like a lot of information, right? Like, I'm given all of these vulnerabilities, I have all of these vectors. Where do I start? And that's the most common question that I think we receive, in talking to organizations is what's first, right? And that is where we get into the prioritization.
Well, you
phase,
just
right?
buy a big tool and you just plug it in and turn it on, right?
Well, you might already have those tools in place.
Sure.
They just might not be properly, deployed, or you might not be using the full tool set available to you. So, oftentimes in those security assessments that we've been referencing, we will prioritize a recommended roadmap for, based on your current environment. We recommend tackling these things in the first 0 to 3 months. The low-hanging fruit. High impact to the business, low impact to end users, right? They're just quick switches.
Sure. Yeah.
And then you start prioritizing kind of the bigger things as you go in that roadmap.
And what's neat about that too is, so we did mention that like a lot of this is built on the same kind of stuff we've done with Secure Score for years. And if you're looking in your own Microsoft tenant right now, you may have noticed in the Defender dashboard under where Secure Score used to be, it has now been moved into an area called exposure management. So they've really actually just baked all of this in, but Secure Score is there. And it has always been weighted and prioritized, right? So again, those things that pop up to the top of the list are intended to be the biggest improvement to your security posture for the lowest impact to your users. So it is actually already built in, but then there's a matter of how do you tailor that to your business needs,
Right.
and how do you prioritize it, again, against other mitigations that you may have in place, right? And that's moving down through the wheel a little bit, right? So we've onboarded some things, we've scoped them out, we've discovered what they really mean. We're prioritizing, and that can be, again, both looking at the tools that we own. It can be looking at the actual business that we have. It can be comparing them against CVSS scores. It can be comparing them against the OWASP top 10, right? Because sometimes our vulnerabilities are internet facing,
Right.
and broken cryptography is always really high on the list there. Then we want to move into validation. This is one of my favorite ones.
Okay.
Right? This
That's
is
exciting.
well, it is because like it's all well and good to say, oh yeah, sure, we just completed a global 1809 deployment, but what if you missed one? And how do you
Right.
know if you missed one? And if you did miss it, where is it? What kind of risk does it expose? And I've seen tons of organizations where we're talking in 2024 about Windows 7 still being in the environment, right?
Sure.
So you need to make sure that if you have Windows 7, you have it properly protected, and you need to validate those controls. You need to validate the protections that are in place. Frankly, you need to validate the vulnerability too. You need to really try to get after it and see what's going on there. So, that's where we start talking about doing tabletop exercises to run through things, bringing in potentially pen testers and red teamers to figure out, where are our actual real vulnerabilities and what do they really mean. And then that tends to play into who is your trusted team,
Right.
right? And that's one of my favorite things as we've gone down this path for years. we started off just being the guys who came in and clicked the security buttons and leave, but I feel like we've got some folks that we can pull some levers and make happen behind the curtain too.
The team expands much more broadly than just IT. Now there's federal requirements to report breaches.
That's right. Yeah.
So you've got to know who your local law enforcement contacts are. Who do I call at the FBI? Right. With cybersecurity insurance, do I have my lawyer on speed dial and
you better,
talk to them
what
first?
Constitutes a breach? Right. When is it technically become a breach? Right. All of that kind of fun stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and that's been great because I've really enjoyed as we've moved into helping organizations with things like tabletop exercises and bringing security partners to bear with pen testing and process auditing and validation and all that kind of fun stuff has been super awesome. It's really opened my eyes a lot to moving beyond simply, well, I turned on the control and I believe in the control. Right. It's fascinating to see those differences and to have the conversations with a lot of the folks that I am friends with on Twitter are the actual red team and pen test folks, and their stories are. You won't sleep at night if you run servers and you chat with them too much.
It sounds like I need to dig into Twitter a little bit and see some
maybe
of those
not.
threads that you're okay.
Maybe not. So the last thing in the wheel, right? So we've done the scoping, we've done the discovery, we've done the prioritization, we've done the validation. Last thing is going to be the mobilization, right? Which is like, okay, so my mitigations are close, but they're not quite there, right? Mm-hmm. I have a CVSS score that's a 7, but it requires hands-on keyboard. Do I need to patch something, or do I need to make sure there's a lock on the door?
Right.
So that mobilization effort can actually be very different based on whatever the risk or the vulnerability or the exposure is, and it may not be the mobilization that you expect it's going to be.
Right.
It's not necessarily going to go by a third-party, SIM, XDR, MDR, whatever. It may just be put a lock on the door, right? It may be, making sure that your hiring processes have extensive background validations and all that kind of fun stuff, right? Yeah. It may be something different from what you thought it was going to be going in.
Yeah. And I guess something that I think you came up with this algorithm or calculation that
I'll take credit for it no matter what.
That I found interesting is that you'd mentioned kind of working with maybe third-party SOC or SIM tools, right? Because let's be honest, everyone wants to sleep at night, and not everyone can be glued to that mailbox getting alerts at 2 a.m. on a Saturday. So we see a lot of folks, kind of rely on outsource SOCs if they don't have the in-house team. What would you say kind of defines or is the math for an organization to kind of handle the responding and monitoring of these alerts?
Well, you touched on it actually a little bit ago when you said, do you have the manpower and do you actually have the skills in place to manage the tools? If you buy a new tool, right, do you have the time to go learn the new tool?
Right.
And you're going to put me on the spot for math. I'm sure I had very detailed numbers on this at one point.
Sure.
But we do routinely see organizations that are struggling with an IT staff that is significantly less than 10% of the overall staff, right? And as organizations get bigger, they tend to find that you can't really functionally be proactive in IT security or IT in general if your IT staff is significantly less than 10% of your actual total staff, right? A 50-person shop is not going to have 5 people for IT. It's just not going to happen, right? Unless your whole product is some sort of technology delivery mechanism. It's just not going to happen. So trying to recognize, what the right number is for you may be very challenging. And it also may present some great opportunities to not take responsibility for doing things in-house, right? It's one of the things I've been really surprised to see happening in the Microsoft security space over the last 16, 18 months has been the transition from settings being on or off to on, off, or Microsoft managed. And I bristled at that initially, but what I realized was that there are some things that are just going to change so frequently that I don't want to be encumbered with having to understand the ins and outs of all of the permutations.
Right.
I just know that whatever the version was, or whatever I want my users being secure, and I don't care what the permutation is. You don't need to bother me with whether it's TLS 1.2 or 1.3.
Sure.
I don't worry about that. So why do I need to worry about what is the specific flavor of phishing-resistant multi-factor authorization or authentication? Brain. I don't need to worry about which one specifically. Microsoft is just going to upgrade the process for my users, Microsoft managed, as new capabilities emerge, because again, just like we talked about with Secure Score's prioritization, they're supposed to be weighted and prioritized both by ease of implementation and burden on the users. So if they're willing to upgrade it, it's supposedly, and you can hang me on this later, supposed to be making it easier for the users.
Right.
So again, that whole idea of like, there are just some things that I don't really have to be in the business of worrying about. It makes my technology also part of my partner portfolio.
Correct. Yeah.
I love that.
And it feels like, and on the theme of continuous, right, we're kind of starting back at the top of the circle, right? We're now understanding all of our threat, and okay, let's go back again and rescope, and okay, we've got these partners that handle this, and we have these tools that done this, and it's just a constantly moving circular framework, I guess, that repeats itself.
It is, and so I did mention that it's all been enrolled into this area called exposure management that now includes Secure Score. It's in the Defender dashboard, but what they've done is they've taken Secure Score and they've contextualized it against the risks and exposures that your organization faces, right? So Secure Score for years has been there as a free component that Microsoft has offered to say, this is your actual security posture based on all the buttons you could click in your environment, right? And it's a 0 to 100 score. Everybody starts at about a 45 and you can work your way up. Then you can take that data and you can bring it over into Compliance Manager and use it to do some automated assessments based on things like PCI DSS or HIPAA or NIST, all the different flavors, CMMC, they're all sitting in there, right?
Yeah.
Hundreds of them.
300
You're going to be wrong no matter what.
It was like 320 or 330, but every time we get on a CIE,
it's always
we
different,
joke about how it's gone up by 6 or 7.
But then to take all those Secure Score numbers that are sort of meaningless by themselves and to contextualize them and say, okay, I'm worried about business email compromise. I'm worried about ransomware. Well, so what the exposure management capabilities do, and again, this is technically free inside the Defender space, technically free, and I'll put a big asterisk behind that because you kind of need to own some of the tools that feed it data.
Right.
But they'll take all of these Secure Score changes that you would need to make for ransomware protection, and they'll package it up as an initiative. And then you can build and you can score yourself based off of that initiative. And that initiative is going to be composed of several metrics, and those metrics will then comply or will be composed of, or will comprise, that's the word, will comprise individual actual Secure Score changes. So you may say, ransomware is the thing, okay? Well, what I need to worry about is file integrity as a metric. Well, that metric may have several Secure Score actions that you can then build toward. And what that allows you to do is prioritize the security concerns, right? And validate, because inside of the exposure management with the metrics, you don't see Secure Scores as on or off. You see them as pass or fail, right? So compliant or not compliant. Right. And it'll give you percentages, and you can track your percentage of your exposure to, say, ransomware or business email compromise, or there's actually certain initiatives based around specific threat actors. So like if you're in a particular industry and, I don't know all the new nomenclature for the new Microsoft threat actor names, but if you're at risk for this one particular threat actor, you can usually go and find the big ones listed there in exposure management. And what's really neat about all of this, again, it's free, It's free. It's free.
Yeah, that's true.
Except it's pulling from other Defender workloads.
Right.
But one of the neat things is that it also pulls in from external attack surface management as a tool.
I think that raised an eyebrow when that first came out in preview. Was it a year ago or a year and a half?
Not even.
ago?
Well, so exposure management was added at Microsoft Build in March, or actually technically Microsoft Secure. Sorry.
It'll change next year.
Some
it's
people
fine.
like details. But yeah, the integration with external attack surface management was technically in preview, but it is there now. And external attack surface management itself was a purchase of Risk IQ, the acquisition that happened by Microsoft right before the beginning of the war in Ukraine. And I know that only because Microsoft gave the Risk IQ tools back to Ukraine to test with. Anyway, so external attack surface management, we have a whole video that talks about that. This is one of my favorite things that has come around in years, because when you start doing these tabletops, when you start doing these exposure conversations, these risk management discussions, people say, there's nothing about me on the internet. I don't have anything that's public facing. We have a commercial website. It's hosted at GoDaddy. That's it. But you plug in a few indicators of things that might belong to your organization, and you let it percolate for a little bit, and
all of a sudden there's a cert that hasn't been renewed in a year or two on some domain that's not been active, but it's still out there. And that's, once you have your foot in the door, you can pry that wide open.
So just to contextualize this, and this we did cover in our external attack surface management video. When I first turned this on, and initially I think you get 30 days for free before Microsoft starts charging you for this, but I turned it on, tried a sample domain of an organization that I know has about 10,000 people in it, okay? And it came back very quickly and found OWASP top 10 violations all the way down the board, but it found something like 15 domains that should have belonged to that organization, but that had the ownership had expired. Okay, 3 of those domains correlated to expired certificate chains. So I, as a threat actor, could go out and buy any one of those domains. I could then send email into the organization that might fail a certificate check, but it comes from a domain that you've previously trusted. Right. You may still have the rules in place in your Exchange environment. You may still have trust of that set of domains for your users. So all of a sudden, I've got a big foot in the door. I may be bypassing your email filtering, right? And now I'm doing it from something that I actually own, and I can redirect your users to another certificate chain that appears to be something that you think you own as well.
It gets messy pretty quick.
It gets really messy really quickly. Yeah, and so having that external attack surface knowledge integrated in along with, it turns out that 10 of your endpoints are actually also hosting up some sort of public-facing web service that you weren't previously aware of. It suddenly takes the shadow IT discussions that we've had for years around people buying cloud solutions, and it sort of flips it over on its head and says, well, now we are exposing, or we're aware of the exposures that are being presented by the things that we thought we had under good control.
So now we're back at discovery, I guess.
We sure are. We're always back there. And the scenario that I always go back to for that was, it was almost 25 years ago that I did a brief stint at a manufacturing facility over in Richmond's East End by the airport. And this place, they were one of the first places I'd ever been to where they had all the network ports on the switches were all tied to individual MAC addresses. Like, you couldn't plug anything in on this network anywhere, right? Yeah. But the plant manager had a phone line plugged into the side of his laptop with something like Go to My PC installed on it, and the whole plant got taken down. Right? So
sure.
These are real things, right? This is real stuff. And so, like, there's a real significance and importance of understanding what tools are available to you, understanding what risks your organization is exposed to, again, based on what you do, how you do it, what data you have to secure, how you have to secure that data, the sensitivity of it, Where you do your business is going to
Right.
vary differently, or very wildly based on your geography and even geopolitical boundaries, all that kind of fun stuff, right? So how do we recommend folks get started? Because again, that was the question that you started with.
And it's generally speaking, I think understanding the tools that they have in place, right? And we do a lot of work with Microsoft, so and as does most corporations in the world, they've got a pretty good chokehold, I guess, on
Foot in the door.
Foot in the door, we'll call it.
Foot in the door.
But understanding what you're all paying for, right? And Adrian alluded to it, is those immersion experiences. Is if I own a Microsoft 365 E3 license, do you know that, hey, Intune and Autopilot comes with that? Or, hey, I can build out a bank of sensitivity labels and apply those to my files. All these different things that are available at your fingertips that you're already paying for, and you might be paying, like someone like a Proofpoint to do something that Exchange Online Protection can do, right? So understanding all of the capabilities within the licenses that you own, I think that's a great start in those CIEs.
And those are typically 2 hours, typically delivered virtually. Although
Yes.
if you're in Richmond, we'd love to come and hang out with you too.
Yes, and 2 hours. I don't want anyone to shudder at the prospect of taking 2 hours out of their day to sit
2
in.
hours is valuable.
You do a phenomenal job of keeping folks engaged and making it conversational, and it is by no means a death by PowerPoint product.
Yeah, no PowerPoints.
No, there's a lot of really good stuff in there. So that really gets people's gears turning of, I didn't know that you could do this. From those CIEs, and still, okay, I've got all these tools at my disposal. I don't know what to do. We recommend, those security assessments that we've been talking about. And again, these are not point in times. We often do these, on an annual basis with organizations because threats change, the tools to combat them change, people change, processes change. So having that continuous, mindset along with CTEM is a good approach to doing these regular security assessments. So we work with organizations, and these are conducted in about a week of understanding what buttons are pressed, what configurations you have in your environment today, what risks are important to you, where are your biggest gaps, and then provide a roadmap of here's the low-hanging fruit, the high impact, lower user impact. Let's knock those out in 3 months. Let's look at larger initiatives, 6, 12 months down the road, but at least have a plan in place to start getting to where you need to be from a security perspective.
Yeah. So short list of key takeaways. We imposed a new 4-letter word on you. We're terribly sorry. CTEM is actually not a bad thing, right? It is just using things that we have already been doing for a long time, the tools that are already at our disposal. Continuous threat exposure management. It's not a whole new paradigm shift. It's just operationalizing what we've been doing in best practices for years. I mean, I'm going to say we didn't even talk about principle of least privilege, but that's a big part of it, right? Making sure that users aren't overprivileged. But CTEM, embrace it. It actually will make your life so much easier because rather than running from fire to fire, you're going to be looking at each smoke signal on the horizon and saying, is that a risk to me? What have I done to prevent that being a risk to me? What do I need to do to make sure that it's not a risk to me, right? And we have seen where that has dropped the amount of time it takes to respond to something by literally dozens of hours. And that's just money put back in your pocket, honestly. Yeah. So learn a little bit about CTEM. We'll make sure that there are some pretty graphics above us later on. I don't know. That's somebody else's job, and somebody in the booth back there. But learn a little bit about the continuous threat exposure management. Play around with it. If you have a Defender environment, it's just go to exposure management and look and see what's there. We'd love to do a security immersion experience for you. Security assessment would be great. We also do tabletop exercises. We have partnerships with cyber insurance organizations, and we're not just theoretical. We're also very hands-on,
very practical. Yes. Yeah. So definitely reach out. We'd love to get in front of you for a immersion experience or talk about anything further.
And in the meantime, there's so many amazing things happening in the Richmond area. There's tech breakfasts that happen quarterly. We have our users group that we sponsor. RVASEC is an annual event. It comes up in June every year. I got to speak at it last year. I'm super excited to be, trying to get back on the docket to present again in the future. But this market has so many amazing things that are going on. I've been really excited to watch it grow and to see the community come back out and be physical and in person again.
It's been pretty impressive. I mean, as a new Richmonder, I've been blown away at how vibrant and expansive the IT community is. So it's been awesome to have all these groups and networks to kind of tap into and hear what other people are seeing. So
awesome. Well, hey, thank you for letting me steal your interview session.
No, I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be doing it again soon sometime.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.